Nothing is more common than the idea that we, the people living in the world of the 20th century, are eminently sane. Even the fact that a great number of individuals in our midst suffer from more or less severe forms of mental illness produces little doubt with respect to the general standard of our mental health. We are sure that by introducing better methods of mental hygiene, we shall improve still further the state of our mental health, and as far as individual mental disturbances are concerned, we look at them as strictly individual incidents, perhaps with some amazement that so many of these incidents should occur in a culture which is supposedly so sane. Can we be so sure that we are not deceiving ourselves? Many an inmate of an insane asylum is convinced that everybody else is crazy except himself. Many a severe neurotic believes that his compulsive rituals or his hysterical outbursts are normal reactions to somewhat abnormal circumstances. What about ourselves?
Welcome to the Rethinking Humanity podcast, where we dive deeper into what makes us human and what causes us to thrive. I'm Lacey Delane.
Hi, I'm Sonya Larrea.
And we are excited to be joining you for our first episode in season 2 live. Yay! Oh my goodness. How are you, Sonya?
I'm good. Enjoying the spring weather here in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's warming up, which is wonderful. And we're growing. We're in the midst of changes. One of them is, hey, here we are live on YouTube. We're going to do this from now on. So that's pretty cool. And you know what? We want you to subscribe so that you can be with us whenever we are live on YouTube. So if you're with us now, we'd love to hear from you during the course of the episode, what you're thinking, what your thoughts are as we're discussing these things that we'll be talking about. And also, we'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast here on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. Please put your opinions in. Let's hear from you. We're excited about being live. We're going to go live from now on, right, Lacey? Is that the deal? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the deal.
So, that's the deal, guys. So show up.
The deal. Yeah, come on and be with us. So yeah, of course, all of our episodes are still going to drop down to our Anchor platform, which goes to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, all the other places. But we're just adding in this video element. So we're going to go from there. And the other thing that we're doing that's new, that's coming, Sonya, you want to tell everybody?
The rebranding.
Woo!
Yes.
Yes. So our colors and our logo and the way the podcast art looks is going to change, but nothing else is going to change. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, I think that's important because when you hear rebranding, some people might say, what does that mean? So I think it's good that you define that we will be talking about what we've been talking about. We're just going to have a different look.
Yes, exactly. Nothing's changing other than how things look. The idea is bringing us to a new level because this artwork is nice, it's pretty, it's wonderful, but it's not anything more than somebody like me who doesn't know anything about artwork and that whole world can make. So we're really excited about that. So we just want to keep you aware and keep a heads up for you that that's going to be happening. Sonya,
awesome.
Go ahead.
No, I just said awesome. I'm excited about it.
Yes, me too. It's been fun to work on, and we're hopeful that we'll have some things to share with you on that front soon. This week has been an interesting past week, Sonya, in the news. There's been some sad police violence happening again, a shooting again today, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I believe it was. I mean, it's a crazy thing. It seems like there's a police shooting every day. It just seems like you wake up and it's happening again and again. And yeah.
I think even I saw a tweet from Andrew Yang who said there's been like 48 shootings in the days since the shooting here in Atlanta.
Oh my God.
Which is like, it's crazy. You know, there's just shootings. If you needed any evidence, just one piece of evidence that this is not a sane society.
Thank you. I was just going to say that. Going to say that we are not a sane society. We keep repeating this over and over, and it's so tragic. It's very, very sad.
Yeah, absolutely. I also saw some of the video of the police violence. I shared that with you, Sonya, and particularly the one that I saw that really struck me was the lieutenant who got pulled over, and he ended up getting pepper sprayed by the police. And I mean, the guy, it was, I mean, from what I understand, it was a routine traffic stop. And the cops got out of the car with their guns pulled. I mean, have you ever gotten pulled over for a traffic violation and a cop had a gun out? I mean,
No.
that's scary.
No.
That's freaking, I'd be scared.
Yeah. No. I haven't had that, but I just feel for these individuals that obviously have had loss in their life because of this, or fear, or the anxiety. It's just this has to stop. And this is one of the reasons I think that we get into the topics that we do, that we have to relook at our society.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today. And as it is a new season, season 2, it's our second year. As many of you may know, we had Sherry Turkle on last Saturday. That was our, or maybe it was 2 Saturdays ago. But anyway, that was our 1-year anniversary of the podcast. And so we're going into season 2 now, which is our second year doing this. And so we're starting with a new launch pad for our discussions. It's another Fromm writing. It's called The Sane Society. So that one, I gotta be honest with you, Sonya, I'm a little nervous today. I think probably because we're doing live, but also we're starting with some new content. You know what I'm saying? I think that's probably part of why I'm like, whoo, I'm a little nervous.
But it's exciting. It's really good content. And
yes,
it's going to be great for the listeners. Yeah.
I think you guys will start to see the connection between To Have or To Be, which is what we did in the first year, in the first season, and the Sane Society. There's huge connections here. And I think there's a lot that we're seeing in the news and in the media today is saying to us exactly what Fromm said. I mean, Sonya, you mentioned this previously, how far ahead of his time, how far ahead Fromm could see into the future of what we were going to be facing.
I think it's important to be talking about Fromm now. It's like what is needed in our culture and society. And the other thing I've mentioned to you, Lacey, I tell everybody this, when I'm reading books, almost most of the books I've read have quoted Fromm. That's crazy, right? I mean, I read a wide range and I'll be like, from here, from there. I'm like, he's everywhere.
Yeah.
So he's relevant.
Yeah. And I mean, I mentioned this previously. I think he's underrated, but I think he's beginning to gain that respect that his writing really deserves, which is awesome. I mean, that's what we really want. So yeah, with that being the case, let's get into it. This episode is titled, Are We Sane? So let's just start. For those of you who are here and listening, I want to ask you to think about this for a second. Do you think we're sane? Are we sane? And I'm not just talking about you. I'm talking about all of us on a grand scale. What do you think, Sonya? Are we sane?
It depends on how you define sane. I would definitely say there are parts of our culture that are suffering from a degree of insanity, but that we have accepted things as quote unquote normal.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think my opinion is probably very clear to people. I definitely think if you're talking about what wellness is and well-being is, and you are saying that the opposite of well-being is not sane, then yes, I definitely think we do not live in a sane society, because our well-being is the very last thing that is valued, that's important in our everyday life and the structure of society and the structure of the way that things happen. So I wonder if those of you who are listening, and if you're watching with us live, we'd love to see your comments pop up here on screen. If you agree, if you disagree, what do you think? But I think it's something to think about for sure. And obviously that's a big part of the content that we're going to be diving into here for the second season. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we are this section, this chapter. It's called "Are We Sane?" The audio that you heard coming in is actually the first 2 paragraphs of this actual chapter, first chapter. And I wanted it. Well, of course, we had Richard read it, who's read for us before. And we love his voice. We love the way he reads. He's great. But I also felt like it would be good, Sonya, for people to hear it more than once, because we're going to read it here in a second. So yeah, let's do that, and then we'll dive into the content.
Okay.
All right. So he says, nothing is more common than the idea that we, the people living in the Western world of the 20th century, are eminently sane. Even the fact that a great number of individuals in our midst suffer from more or less severe forms of mental illness produces little doubt with respect to the general standard of our mental health. We are sure that by introducing better methods of mental hygiene, we shall improve still further the state of our mental health. And as far as individual mental disturbances are concerned, this is key. We look at them as strictly individual incidents, perhaps with some amazement that so many of these incidents should occur in a culture which is supposedly so sane. So the volume of individual incidences of mental illness, basically we keep blaming on individuals, but could it be that it's a more societal issue?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So the second paragraph is, can we be so sure that we are not deceiving ourselves? Many an inmate of an insane asylum is convinced that everybody else is crazy except himself. Many a severe neurotic believes that his compulsive rituals or his hysterical outbursts are normal reactions to somewhat abnormal circumstances. What about ourselves?
Yeah. What about ourselves? How can we take a look at ourselves and the way we do life from an objective perspective? I think that's what he's getting at here.
Yeah, I mean, the first paragraph is very interesting. As you point out, Fromm is looking at our society says, okay, we have these individual instances or individuals that have issues, but we don't see how that integrates into our society as a whole. Right. And I think number one, which we'll get into further, the number of people suffering from mental illness is much higher than is even reported. Right. And then you have to ask, well, is it the culture that's mentally ill? Is it the individual? What's creating that? You know, there's that question.
Right. And then you look at the sheer number of people who are experiencing this. And then I think at a certain point, when the number is so high, it's really hard to not say, could it be the society? Could it be the culture, you know, that people are living in instead of some individual pathology? Right.
Absolutely. I think what was fascinating about this chapter, I know I might be moving around in the chapter here, but how Fromm talks about the material wealth. The most democratic, material wealthiest countries are the ones that suffer from mental illness. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. Now, that is speaking to me because we live in a world that we have, you know, we've got we got an abundance of things. So why are we dealing with such mental health issues? Why would our society be described as insane? What do you think, Lacey?
Yeah. I mean, well, I think this kind of links back to the having and the being mode, you know, of existence. But I think we think that the comforts of having are the things that are going to make us be in a place where we have well-being, give us well-being. And that's clearly where we're at. We have abundance. We have access to things. It's easy to have things in this country, but it seems that there's a lot of people who don't experience well-being, a lot of depression.
And from what he does, it's very interesting. He traces back. I found this fascinating. Of course, he goes back in history he has a quote in here, and I didn't even realize this. This is going back to 1500 BC to 1860 AD. There was no less than 8,000 peace treaties were signed.
Yeah.
That says something about our society. And he does get into the fact of, wars, of constantly being at war, one country with another. And then once you get out of that war, that country that was your enemy now becomes your friend. And so it seems like it's a round robin table where you're constantly dealing with the war. The war you have this year may be a different war the next year. And then 5 years from now, you're back to this war.
Yeah.
And I would say that shows a degree of insanity too.
Yes.
You have a culture that keeps repeating this. And if we've had all these peace treaties, but we can't achieve peace, what does that say about us as a society?
Right.
What does that say about modern civilization?
Yes. And the arrangement of war is like killing people, like it's the most extreme form of creating an other and demonizing them so that you can kill them, have an excuse to kill them, which I'm not sure how killing people solves any problems.
Well,
correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure how
without throwing, I'm sure people out there are really good with their history. Typically also wars happen because of economics. There's an economic driven factor here. Again, going back to the money.
Right.
Wars can be quote unquote money making, even though at the same time we know that, millions or billions of dollars are spent on armaments. So it does point to the modern civilization, having that ultimate question, are we sane or insane? That we keep repeating this. Yeah.
So I like what he says about this. He says, during these wars, every participant firmly believed that he was fighting in his self-defense for his honor, or that he was backed up by God. The groups with whom one is at war are often, from one day to the next, looked upon as cruel, irrational fiends whom one must defeat to save the world from evil. But a few years after the mutual slaughter is over, the enemies of yesterday are our friends, and the friends of yesterday are our enemies. And again, in full seriousness, we begin to paint them with appropriate colors of black and white. That is exactly what you just said. It's like, oh, you're terrible, horrible, and we're going to kill you. And then in like 10 years, peaceful, and It's insane. It's insane.
Right. So there's a repetitiveness of this, and then we know we're still living in it today with ongoing wars, which is very sad. They're like never-ending wars, it seems like, and the sad part of that too is the people suffering are children, innocent children, women typically, and displaced people. So there you have your refugees. So yeah, that speaks to society. It also speaks to what are our values that this just keeps repeating itself.
Yes.
Worldwide.
Ironically, he says this: everybody is looking with a mixture of confidence and apprehension to the statesmen of the various peoples, ready to heap all praise on them if they succeed in avoiding a war, and ignoring the fact that it is only these very statesmen who ever cause a war. Usually not even through their bad intentions, but listen to this, but by their unreasonable mismanagement of the affairs entrusted to them. How about diplomacy, bitches?
Well, and what's interesting when you read from, it's just if you could be reading today, like our political structure, right?
Yes.
Both with this and also with the economics that he talks about. He also talks about how, we've talked a lot about this, about the money we spend in our country, but I love this because this goes to a lot of these freedoms that people feel are very important, especially now when we're talking about the violence, gun violence. It says economists look with some apprehension to the time when we stop producing armaments and the idea that the state should produce houses and other useful and needed things instead of weapons. Easily provokes accusations of endangering freedom and individual initiative. We're still having those discussions today.
Yep.
About what we should be doing and what we can do. Yep. And this is just so relevant. It's like a never-ending discussion and argument about where what we should be financing. Right. And if we take a liberty away, if we say, because I know earlier in the podcast you brought up the police incidences. So if we limit people's access to guns, then everybody screams individual liberties.
Right.
And then at the same time, you have this insane society where kids are getting killed on the streets, you know? You have
Right.
to question what is going on here.
Hmm. For context, this book was written in 1955.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, so, you know, like war, obviously, during those times was a very big social, political issue. And I definitely, we've said this before, but Fromm is a staunch advocate against nuclear weapons. In his writing, it's very clear it comes through his concern about nuclear weapons. But I want to step back just a bit, because I don't think I did a very good job of giving you guys context of kind of what we're doing here. So at the beginning, he's saying, look, are we really sane? Are we, is the idea that we are sane, is it something we can question? And so these things that we're talking about, war, the economy, but yet the lack of equality for everyone, and the next couple things we're going to mention, these are all a few things that he's kind of building an argument for why and how we can see that it's really not that sane. Mm-hmm. And that there's something more to go deeper into. The other thing he mentions is the media and it's the lack of substance.
Yeah.
Listen to this tidbit that he writes. I mean, my goodness. He says, we have a literacy above 90% of the population, but instead of giving people the best of past and present literature and music, the media of communication, supplemented by advertising, fill the minds of men with the cheapest trash, lacking in any sense of reality, with sadistic fantasies, which a halfway cultured person would be embarrassed to entertain even once in a while. That's strong.
I know. When I read that kind of blew me away, because he wasn't even in the time of us having the internet, you know. And we can definitely, state that we're all exposed to a lot of misinformation and trash. I think Fromm would be just stunned at what we're fed consistently. And it's interesting how he says that any suggestion that the government should get involved, say with production of movies and radio programs, would be met. I think this is very true with indignation and accusations in the name of freedom and idealism.
Agreed.
And that definitely would be a hard thing for people to swallow, because we have this kind of anti-government feeling amongst obviously a large group of citizens.
That makes me think a little bit of when we talked about sane consumption and how the government could subsidize some industries to help put more healthy products out on the market until businesses would be able to put them out in a way that they could have a stable business with it. Similar to me. I understand why people might be like, whoa, you can't do that. That's socialism and all those, crazy things. But I if you think about it outside of the context of like, oh my God, government's going to control and brainwash us. Okay, first of all, ads are doing that now. So, and the government is probably part of that. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. The second part of that is that, like, really step out of that place and realize, like, why would it be bad if there was access on television or on social media to mental health information, self-care, like empowering people, information, like stuff that would get rid of the stigma around sexuality and taboo and women's rights and, feminism and those types of things, bringing us back to a more human place as a culture. What's wrong with that?
So I think first of all, there's a distrust generally of anything when you say government, when people use the word government. So you probably have to work with the language. Second to that, I would go back to Have or to Be, where Fromm talked about kind of at the local level getting involved and having groups of individuals involved and then experts. So I think you need those kind of forms of organizations, perhaps dismantle some of the things we have now to start regaining that trust in the public. If you recall, I mean, we still have it, of course, like public television. That's supposedly like, very neutral, not, right, left. It's not supposed to be sending one message or the other. So we need forms of media that are unbiased, basically.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're living in a time that people get climb into one thing, as we know. I don't want to name any specific like channel or whatever,
Right.
or web page. And they're only getting their information from one source.
Right.
And you know, that is unhealthy in itself.
Right. Lots of confirmation bias with social media today. And television is another place where that happens as well. But it takes concerted effort to make sure that you're not just hearing things that you want to hear when it comes to the news, and, you know, or at least the opinion from whatever side, you know.
Absolutely.
The next thing Fromm mentions here is the way man spends his time. And we have a clip about with this, almost the same exact quote on our Rethinking Humanity Instagram page. Basically, he's saying, hey, men in the 50s, they had more time, more working hours than what they had. I'm sorry, less working hours than what they had 100 years prior. And he says, but men don't know how to use their newly gained free time. And they just try to kill the time and are glad when another day is over. And that sounds familiar. Like, yay, it's the weekend. Finally, I hate Mondays. You know what I'm saying? Like, that is very much a thread in the way we live our lives.
Absolutely. That's something that we definitely touched upon a lot in the podcast about this whole, well, we kind of talk about the automaton, you know, going to work every day, doing the same thing, repeat, rinse, repeat, and not really having a valuable, I guess, quality of life, because they're doing a job they don't like or that they're forced to do. So we've dug into that before. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, Fromm also mentions that there's been, at his time, there were, and I'm guessing there's still some pushback to this now, but in his time, that many of the psychiatrists and psychologists refused to entertain the idea that a society as a whole might be lacking in sanity. They hold that the problem of mental health in a society is only that of a number of unadjusted individuals, and not that of a possible unadjustment of the culture itself. I think that's an interesting phrase there, Sonya. Unadjustment of culture. It makes me think, the culture can adjust to humans instead of the other way around.
Right. And also, the reason that I think the psychiatrist would not like that, think of that, would it be easier to deal with unadjusted individuals or with an unadjustment of the culture itself?
Right.
You know, which is a much bigger problem.
Right.
And much harder to solve, because you're having to dismantle what you've always known. And so it's much easier to say there's these individuals that need help, not the society as a whole.
There you go. And I'm sure there's some kind of financial route to that as well. Like it would not enable these big industries or these big corporations to keep making the money that they're making.
Absolutely.
If it changes as society.
Right.
Yeah. So he calls what he's talking about here the idea that, you know, that the whole society can be sick, more so than just the individuals. So he's basically saying, I'm comparing an individual pathology with what he calls the pathology of normalcy. And Sonya, we were talking yesterday, I was like, what exactly does that word mean? Pathology? And so I started looking up, and, you know, we chatted about it. What is, I mean, you know, it's a specialized, obviously, vocabulary word. So tell me a little bit about that. And then I want to share a story about.
Yeah, your story, I think, defines it the best. But I told you my opinion that pathology is like deviating from the norm. And he talks about, so that's when you question, well, what's the pathology of normalcy? Right. And I think you really hit it on the head with your little story. So I'm going to let you go ahead.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, I guess we think of pathology, like you're saying, as a deviation from like what's normal. But then if I think of it in the phrasing that he has, the pathology of normalcy, the deviation of normalcy, and I'm like, I don't know if that quite hits it. So it's so funny because I'm rehabbing my knee and getting ready to go back to playing soccer. And so I was at my physical therapy appointment this morning, And my physical therapist said something about the pathology of your body. And I was like, what? And so I said, what does that mean? Tell me what that word means. And he told me in like, physiological language. And I was like, well, let's go back further. What does it mean in a general sense? And he goes, well, that's, not really my world. And my world is like the human body and whatever. And I was like, yeah, like I'm thinking like social pathology, and he goes, well, it's just being unwell. It's an unwellness. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's it. The unwellness. I don't know.
Of normalcy.
Exactly.
Like
yeah. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now.
It is now. Yeah.
Unwellness, everybody. The unwellness.
I think that's a great way to describe it. Obviously, I think it's good. It's perfect. Yeah.
I think so too. And I think it clearly communicates what Fromm is trying to say here, that there is unwellness associated with what we call normal today, with how we live in a normal life today. There's pathology there. There's sickness. There's disease. There's an unwell and an unwellness. I think that's very clear. It hits the nail on the head. And that's what the whole next chapter is about, that he jumps into. It's, the pathology of normalcy. Can a society be sick? And really, of course, that's the theme of this whole book. But he's going to go into that in a lot more detail, and we will too, in an upcoming episode.
Yeah. I know we're going to get into, I love that definition, actually, Lacey. I think it's perfect. One of the things that Lacey and I did talk about is that this was written in 1955. So Fromm does have statistics in here for different countries, and like homicide rates, suicide rates that we realize aren't going to match our statistics today in our country. Yeah. And a comment I made to her, without getting yet into specific statistics, is I know for a fact from much of the literature I'm reading that the rates of depression have increased in our country, especially during this COVID time, especially among adolescents, young people. So we are right there. I'm not going to give you a statistic right now. I think, Lacey, we were going to try to put up a website, right, that people could go look at. Yeah.
Our awesome technical producer is on it. He's about to pop this thing up on the screen, I'm sure. It is from the Mental Health America, excuse me. And these are just some quick facts and statistics about mental health. Thank you, Victor. You're the best.
I know.
Isn't he awesome? He's so great.
He's good.
Yes, we're so fortunate to have him. General mental health data set here says nearly 1 in 5 American adults will have a diagnosable mental health condition in any given year.
Wow.
And I would argue that this is like just the numbers that are reported. Think of how many people that you're like, yeah, they're probably suffering from depression. They're not talking to people about it, right?
Right.
46% of Americans will meet the criteria for diagnosable mental health conditions sometime in their life. Half of those people will develop conditions by the age of 14. 46%. 46. Wow. That's almost 50.
Yeah.
Which is almost half. When it's 50%, there's something going on here, people.
Yeah, that's the thing that we did talk about too, is a lot of these numbers, I think, aren't going to reflect completely. They can't be completely accurate because not everyone reports these, depression or anxiety. But I think it really speaks to how our society is troubled. Fromm also does talk about how in these, wealthier countries, like alcoholism, suicide, those are all much higher. And you think about that. Here's a country where you have everything materially that you need. And it makes you stop and wonder, well, what does someone in a poor country have that we don't have? There's a lot of answers I could give you right now, but it's something that makes me think we have to take a closer look at our society and how we're living and what we're missing. Right. And it's definitely not wealth.
It reminds me of Dr. Gabor Mate, who I believe we played a little clip of him on a previous episode talking about these high numbers and how when it's 40%, 50%, that's whenever you have to go, whoa, wait a minute. there's something going on here. This is not just a bunch of individuals who are having problems. His like picture that he used to kind of illustrate it is, if you're doing some type of a scientific experiment and you're using a culture, the actual culture that you like put under the microscope, if 50% of that is sick, what happens? What kind of, like, what's in your mind about like the result of that? It's the whole thing is sick if 50% of it is sick, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then you see, it's, as Victor's scrolling through this, we're seeing all these different communities, and we're experiencing that now in our country with trauma from, our COVID, trauma from a lot of the racial issues that have arisen. A lot of things, well, all these things have always existed, but people are dealing with a lot, and and the people are our society. These are the people that we get up every day and we go to the store or we have to interact with. It's not as if you can separate yourself, to me, from what is going on in your world, because we interact with each other every day.
Right.
And ignoring that, to me, is ignoring your neighbor, lack of empathy. We could go on and on. It's just, it's not a way that we can continue to function in our world.
Right. And the lack of community, I think, is probably one that we could put our finger on for the last year with COVID and being locked in. The same organization had some statistics from this past year and talking and showing how much more of an increase that we've seen in mental health issues during the time of the lockdown and the early days and times of the pandemic. So that further complicates an issue that we were already seeing in a strong way before. And then you have the pandemic, and then you have economic issues and people who are unemployed, people are losing jobs, people are going through their savings to make it, people who are going into debt. And that in itself, just having debt, I was talking to somebody else about this the other night, having debt, there's a I don't know, it's like a pain associated with debt. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't have freedom, and that's another stressor. It's
another stressor. And I think what has happened now, a lot of individuals have been kind of thrown out of their world, the quote unquote normal world that we're going to actually analyze from, that is not normal, or there's a pathology of normalcy, we'll say,
right,
an unwellness. And so what I think has happened is the people that aren't in that world anymore, we've been forced to be out of that world, whether it is you lose your job or you lose a loved one or you lose your community. We're kind of forced to rethink, okay, exactly what we're talking about. Is this the life I want? How do I want to live? This doesn't feel right. And it's a ripple effect. Like I see society, that's what I'm looking at, is we have an opportunity to do this differently. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be people that push against it because they want to keep things, status quo.
Yeah.
But we do have an opportunity to make a difference here.
It takes a lot of courage to be willing to look at not only your own life and the issues and problems and things that could be improved in your own life, but as a society, for all of us to sit and go, this is not really as good as it could be. It could be a lot better. It takes a lot of courage to do that. But I do believe, like we talked about with Sherry Turkle, we're in a liminal moment here where we can make some of those changes. We have the opportunity to see them very clearly. And it's a time when things aren't as normal as they normally are.
Right.
So it's a little bit easier to make those changes.
And I think just the question, of saying, are we living in an insane society, is very provocative. And I think it's important that Fromm is bringing that out into the open, and we're talking about it, and it becomes something that people are saying, whoa, wait a minute, are we or aren't we? And what does this mean that we're questioning? That's a whole rupture of the way we've been living.
Yeah, and it takes that courage to do that, and then courage to say, hey, there are solutions. We can do something different. We can make changes. Is it easy? No, but so neither is living how we're living right now. You know what I'm saying? Like it's painful in its own way.
Absolutely.
So his data in this chapter, he says, the conclusion he draws about the data from the 50s in this chapter, he says we find then that the countries in Europe, which are among the most democratic, peaceful, and prosperous ones, like we mentioned, and the United States, the most prosperous country in the world, show the most severe symptoms of mental disturbance. Should raise a red flag, I think. The aim of the whole socioeconomic development of the Western world is that of the materially comfortable life, relatively equal distribution of wealth, stable democracy, and peace. And the very countries which have come closest to this aim show the most severe signs of mental imbalance. That's so crazy. So he says, is there not something fundamentally wrong with our way of life and with the aims toward which we are striving? Could there not be something wrong with it? Could it be, this is pretty powerful here, that the middle class life of prosperity, while satisfying our material needs, leaves us with a feeling of intense boredom? That suicide and alcoholism are pathological ways to escape from this boredom.
Yes. Yeah. It's pretty powerful, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense that we as human beings would come to a place of intense boredom by doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. I mean, do you eat the same meal every time you eat?
Right. No.
I mean, that's not who we are as a species. As a species, we like and need variety. You know what I'm saying? And so I can absolutely see how the way we're doing life, we're molded to do life, would bring us to a place of boredom. And that the suicide, the alcoholism, these are ways to like just try to numb ourselves and get through.
Yeah, I like this statement too. Could it be that these figures are a drastic illustration for the truth of the statement that man lives not by bread alone, and that they show that modern civilization fails to satisfy profound needs in man? If so, this is the part that's so cool. What are those needs?
Yeah.
I love that. Absolutely love that.
That modern civilization fails to satisfy profound needs in man. It's a need. It's a profound need in man. Is that important? Of course it is.
Of course it is, yeah.
Why are we not taking more time for that? So he says the following chapters are an attempt to answer this question and to arrive at a critical evaluation of the effect contemporary Western culture has on the mental health and sanity of the people living under our system. It seems that we should take up the general problem of the pathology of normalcy, i.e. the unwellness of what normal is, which is the premise underlying the whole trend of thought in this book that we're going through and in what we're talking about. So that's where we're going for season 2.
Absolutely. I actually wanted to read something because we're talking about culture.
Yes.
If you don't mind, for the audience to define a little bit. Okay. Because when people say culture, you think, well, what does that mean? So I'm going to read just a passage from a book that I've been reading that I think fits so good with this.
Tell us the book.
The book is The Way of Integrity, Martha Beck.
Cool.
And it says, by culture, I don't mean opera or surrealist painting. I'm talking about any set of social standards that shapes the way people think and act. Every group of humans, from couples to families to cell blocks to sewing circles to armies, has cultural rules and expectations that help them cooperate. Some of these are explicit, like traffic laws or workplace dress codes. Others are implicit, like the assumption that when you go to a nice restaurant for dinner, you'll use silverware instead of plunging your face directly into your food like a truffle pig. I love that.
Yeah.
Humans create elaborate cultures because we are intensely social beings. Lacey has always said this, by the way. Yes. Dependent on the goodwill of others from the moment we're born. We also have an enormous capacity to absorb and replicate the behavior of people around us. From childhood, often without even noticing it, we learn exactly how to win approval and belonging in our particular cultural context. We act bubbly, quiet, or brave to please our families. We immediately begin to like whatever our friends say they like. We throw ourselves into schoolwork, babysitting, family feuds, whatever we believe will assure our place in the human world. In this rush to conform, we often end up ignoring or overruling our genuine feelings, even intense ones. We know this, like longing or anguish to please our cultures. At that point, we're divided against ourselves. We aren't in integrity, one thing, but in duplicity, two things. Or we may try to fit in with a number of different groups, living in multiplicity, many things. We abandon our true nature and become pawns of our culture, smiling politely, sitting attentively, wearing the perfect, uncomfortable clothes.
Oh my God. Pawns of the culture.
Yeah.
Dude.
I just think it fits along with Fromm.
Yeah.
Because that idea of integrity and the idea of like the approval and also trying to fit in with your culture, which would be the normalcy, right? The normal things that everybody's doing when you're not doing what you should be doing as an individual.
To me, it feels like the squelching of genuineness. You know, it's like instead of knowing yourself and learning yourself and listening to yourself, it's like, you don't have time for that. Ignore that. That's not important. Do what we tell you to do. Do what we think is important. Don't do what you think is important. Don't have time to think about what's important to you. Don't have time to think about what makes you you, what makes you unique. That is a skill that we have to learn. And it's something that if we don't have time for, it's really difficult to develop. And again, one of the reasons why I'm so pro basic income is that helps us with our time a little bit more, open up our time a little bit more.
Right. And you see the pressure when I read that of thinking of going along with the culture, because we want approval, we want to be loved. And so we go along with whatever the culture is telling us to do. And that's what I love about also Fromm, because he's saying, hey, maybe the culture's messed up.
Yeah.
And so that we got to start with cleaning that up.
Yeah.
So it's just very powerful way to think. That's why we love the Sane Society.
Yes. Yay! Yes, we're excited about it. And you know what else is cool, Sonya? We've talked about this before. There's so many articles that are being written every day that line up with this exact theme. You know, there's one on palliative care that we will likely talk about more on an upcoming episode. But my point is that you can see the manifestation of this in so many places, in so many ways in our society now. And it's time to stop ignoring it. It's time to start like facing it head on and enjoying finding the solutions to these challenges, because it's not impossible. It's possible, and it's worth it. It's totally worth it to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right, Lacey, about the themes. Everywhere you turn, we're seeing this coming up in different areas. So these are questions that people are, I think, waking up and asking, like, we got to do something different here.
Yeah, so we're excited to be diving into our next season, our next, set of topics, our newest book with Fromm, and some other, things that are going on within the culture, within our lives that are examples of this. So we're so excited about that. We want to remind you to subscribe to us here on YouTube and follow us also on Instagram. We're at Rethinking Humanity. We're doing much more on Instagram than we are on any of the other social platforms. So check us out there and stay tuned. We have Melissa Bernstein. Yeah. She's coming up. What do you remember the date on that, Sonya?
Oh, no, it's coming up in April, right?
I think it's May.
May.
Oh, yeah.
May. Hello. We're in April.
Oh, no, it's totally fine. There's still some time left in April, so don't worry. Okay. Yeah, May the 7th is what we have for her. So that's going to be really good. She just started an online wellness hub. That's my words for it. I don't know what they're calling it, but it's called Lifelines. She also wrote a book called Lifelines and powerfully shared her story of fighting depression, even as a highly successful woman.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. I'm super excited to hear her story because, I think a lot of people will be able to relate. And
Yes.
it fits obviously with the theme of everything we're talking about. So it's going to be cool.
Right. And of course, we can't leave this episode without saying, if you did not hear the episode with Sherry Turkle,
Oh my gosh.
you are missing out. Check that
Yes,
out.
listen to it. She's awesome.
Yes, we love her so much and we love her writings. Highly recommend any of her books. And anything like her TED Talk is really, really good too. So check it out. Sonya, I'm so happy. What a great episode 24 in the books.
I love it. I love live, people.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, we get to do this more.
Yes, we're going to do it more. Well, thank you all for being with us. We will see you next time on the Rethinking Humanity podcast.
Bye.
Bye.